Alright, I'm gonna do something I don't normally do when it comes to making content and be direct and straightforward with my point right up front in the beginning of this video. Insani is one of Brazil's best players and is currently being trapped by the utter fucking incompetence that is MiBR as an organization. Because even though they did the funniest goddamn thing of all time by beating and eliminating Falcons back at the Austin Major,
it's never over.
What?
I fucking love you, Dust.
That hasn't really smoothed over the fact that everything else they've done has been utterly incompetent from the first. This team has been nowhere near anything close to competitive for almost an entire year. The roster moves this team has made post the inclusion of LBKcs have done nothing to really push forward the needle, and all of that brings us to where we are today, where MiBR have unveiled their new lineup, where they've taken a cue from Furia and have brought in some European imports, from G2 Ares, the young Opera Klim, and then to help him out, a European veteran, a former major winner. Someone who can really bridge the language and the experience barrier to make this team whole, a la Yakindar. It is, of course, Kickert. That's right, the same Kickert who was the worst performing player on that Outsiders major winning team with Jame back in Ye Day at IEM Rio. Yeah, that Kickert. What the fuck? Anyways, if you guys like this kind of content, you can show me by leaving a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Help me take case by the end of the year. Also, follow me on twitch.tv/LionHeartZ2. Over the next week or so, I'm actually going to be doing some variety gaming, getting into the Hollow Knight series so I can get into Silksong, as well as playing Borderlands 4 with my brother when that game launches this week. So if you want to see me in more of a casual context, you can do so there. Also helps me get bigger numbers on Twitch so I can co-stream more events in the future. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and thank today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by SkinsMonkey, a CS2 trading website. You put in the skins that you want to trade, you select what you want, you use my code LionHeartZ for up to $5 off, or click the top link in the description, and boom, new drip.
Nice.
You can also use my code for a 35% deposit bonus if you want to buy with real money. And they have a free section with cool giveaways. So check the top link in the description, use my code to buy 15 Dragon Lores to let them know I sent you their way, and thank you to SkinsMonkey for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let's go through a brief timeline of what MiBR have been doing to the roster in the post-Austin Major context. Firstly, not long after, LBKcs was benched and eventually moved on to a different project. I was already pretty alarmed when this happened because LBKcs, despite his own issues, was for me the second best player on MiBR, and frankly he was a prospect that I think you could build around. He worked well around Insani, and frankly MiBR had other issues than him, so I was already quite alarmed when he was moved first. In his place came one of the 15 different Brazilian players named Nix. This one, like I'm assuming many of his other brethren, is also shit. He was their worst performing player by far during his tenure and was putting up numbers that would make Kerrigan look like Donk if you didn't know what you were looking at. During the same period, Safe, their longtime opper, also regressed and had an awful time as well, and there were multiple games that we've talked about in various recaps on the channel where Insani was dropping 50 bombs just to fucking lose the Series 0-2. Like some real prime Nico Sports, Mouse Sports era shit where Insani is just having to backpack them through any round when they do get going. Burnsin, who was a player who really popped off in their elimination of Falcons at the Austin Major, also really hasn't been much of a prospect either. So every roster move that MiBR has made up until this point has failed spectacularly, and it was clear the team was going to need further changes. The first happened at the end of August. I didn't get a chance to cover this because there was other stuff going on at the time, but that was that Save would be benched and MiBR were going to be acquiring Klim from G2's academy side, G2 Ares. Now, Klim is an incredibly young prospect, he's an opper, and much like Molodoy, he's being picked up on the prospect of what he could be, not on what he's done, as Klim has never played a match against top 50 opposition, let alone anything close to top 30, 20, 10, whatever else. This man is green as spring grass, but honestly, taking a risk on young oppers is not nearly the same as taking a risk on young riflers, as it's a lot harder for oppers to break out into the top 30, 20, etc. And MiBR took one layer of safety further by acquiring Klim on loan, so that if things don't work out, they're not overly committed to him signing in the first place. Also, quick editor's note, I only caught this when I was rereading the HLTV article in between takes. Klim has played exactly 4 maps against top 50 opposition, not 0, which is what I think I said. So, yeah, 4. 4 games, not 4 series, 4 maps. Still not very much. And with Klim being a 19-year-old Russian player, obviously there's going to be an inherent language issue entering into an all-Brazilian lineup. So, much like Furia, you bring in another international piece to try and help smooth things over. And it's safe to say that Cocktor is not exactly who I would have picked first, or 15th, or 100th. Because Cocktor is not a good player, nor has he really ever been at any point in his career. Yes, I know he won a major. Again, he's a support player. He was nowhere near good on that Outsiders team. He is someone who's just kind of floated behind James for most of his career, and that's the only time he's ever won anything. Now, the saving grace is that he's only on loan, so it's not exactly the biggest commitment from MiBR, but I feel like you're not putting your best foot forward. Like, the whole point was Nix and Safe were shit, so you've replaced those two players with an unproven prospect who could be good, and a player that we know for sure is washed. This is not in any way comparable to Yakindar, where Yakindar still had flashes of showing what he could be. There's no room where Cocktor joins MiBR and suddenly becomes like a star player. He's never been that. So you've just added a piece that's guaranteed to be mid. You're changing the whole language situation. You still have Burnson, who's also mid, Exit, who's also mid, and then you have Insani as the lone good player alongside potentially Klim. Does this make MiBR better? I don't really think it does. The big difference between Furia and MiBR is that Furia were at least like a fringe top 15 team that could occasionally take a good series win. They had pieces that were worth working around more than just one. MiBR are so far behind the paradigm of other Brazilian teams that I don't see how this moves the needle significantly, which brings me back to the point of this video, and that's that Insani is trapped. Because this guy isn't just good, he's one of the best pure entries in the world. At least in 2024, when MiBR were still a semblance of a functioning roster. I'm going to make a comparison here. Here is 2024 Xertion. Here is 2024 Insani at LAN. Now, I'm going to add some immediate caveats. Xertion played far more maps as a benefit of the fact that mouse sports were much better than MiBR throughout the entirety of last year. That's a given. So Xertion has a much bigger sample size and on average played better opponents, which is why when you look at the stats, Insani does have better stats on the surface than Xertion does. If we were to adjust these for competition, unfortunately we don't have much data for top 10 and top 5 competition because MiBR never really reached those heights. I am 100% confident that Xertion is the better player than Insani. But the thing I want to point out is that Insani was an insane, get it, T-side player throughout all of 2024. If you go one layer deeper, he was one of the most successful high-volume entries in Tier 1 during that time, getting close to a 50% entry success rate on over 26% of attempts. That is straight up a top 5 entry player in the world throughout 2024. And if you watched Insani play during that time, the eye test backs that up. This dude is crispy as fuck. But what continually held MiBR back was a lack of strong leadership, never having a good IGL, and most importantly having a wretched map pool, none of which is fixed by these recent roster moves. Which brings us to the largest issue in the room. It's the elephant right there, and we've all talked about this several times on this channel, and that's that Brazil is the worst about managing buyouts. Now, I really don't think this criticism is falling on deaf ears. If you ask the average Brazilian fan, they hate this shit too. But the reality is, spread across many different teams, Furia, MiBR, Pain, Legacy, what have you, there is more than enough talent for there to be a Brazil-only, a 5-man Brazilian lineup that could be, at bare minimum, a top 10 team in the world. You have someone like Bubblesj, who could easily be a top-level IGL. You can even take Fallen in his current iteration from Furia. You take someone like NQZ as your Opper. You take Insani as your star entry player. At that point, all you would need is to pick a good enough support player, then a secondary star rifler, someone who could maybe anchor or lurk, and that's going to be a roster that bangs. But the reality is, if you're Pain, you can't buy Insani right now, even though he probably wants out of MiBR because he's worth like $7.25 bajillion on his buyout. And vice versa, if you're MiBR and Exit's a dogshit IGL and you want to get Bubblesj, he's also got that extremely unreasonable buyout. So now we're stuck in a situation that Fury has given you a blueprint forward where bringing in 2 international players can really help revitalize your team, and MiBR have done the worst version of it and are not going to be able to get success to the same extent the Fury are. So we're going to perpetuate this cycle where Insani is once again trapped on a fucking dead roster going nowhere and nothing's going to change. Why must it be a fact of life in Brazilian CS that you must do your 7-year march of pain and suffering like Queserado before you're allowed to have a good roster? Why can't we just have players, young and in their prime, be more available to be moved to other teams to build good rosters. Why do we have to greed ourselves into a corner where we have to watch these disparate pieces suffer when Brazil could be putting forward top 10 caliber rosters tomorrow? Anyways, dialing back my doomerism just a tad, I will have to say this when it comes to these moves for MiBR. I think that these being on loan initially made me very skeptical, but after talking about it more with some other people, trying to get some second opinions, I do agree that it's probably for the best, because ultimately it is non-committal, which at first was one of my issues with it. I don't like that it's non-committal, at least on the surface, but if things don't go well, which projecting forward I really don't think they will, it means that MiBR aren't overly invested in this project. If Clim can't convert into tier 1.5 or tier 1 competition, then you're not committed to him long term. Same thing with Kickard. You can pivot and go elsewhere in 3 to 6 months. But at least for right now, in the build to the Budapest Major, it gives you something to try and work with. And if Clim can break out, then maybe you can smooth over some of the harder areas. I think at the end of the day, though, MiBR is still going to be overly reliant on Insani and Clim to do the bulk of the work. And I would not be shocked at all to continue seeing Exit, Burnson, and now Kickard not giving us very many HLTV green ratings in subsequent matchups. Yeah, I don't know. Free Insani, bro. Let my man be on a good team, please. If you guys enjoyed this slightly unhinged rant, make sure you show me by leaving a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Help me at 10k subs by the end of the year. Thank you to Skins Monkey for sponsoring this video. Check top link description, go try on their website, listen to I sent you their way. Thank you to them. Okay, I'm gonna try and set a new personal record here on the channel members. Are you guys ready? Lock it in. Shout out to our channel members: JesseTiv, Milan Berta, Bubblesj, Dr. Cocktor, Patatas Kaftesi, MiBR, LBKcs, Cody Foxworthy, JesseTiv, I'm Flashback, Stoney White, Rowdy, LBKcs, Snax Enjoyer, zerotwocs, drudenae, chron, Gano, Zyro, Devvrat Singh, Clyde Mead. If you want to become a channel member, it's the number one way to support me directly. You can see me in the video just like this, as well as customer order community Discord, $5 a month. Twitch.tv/LionHeartZ2. Fuck you. Bye.